The night the Harrington family removed Eleanor Voss from Harrington Hall was the same night they unknowingly began destroying everything they had built. Rain hammered the Georgian windows of the estate while black Range Rovers waited silently along the stone driveway. Inside, 30 guests in expensive clothes stood carefully arranged, close enough to watch, far enough to deny involvement. Eleanor stood at the bottom of the grand staircase in a long gray coat. One hand rested on a leather suitcase, pale, composed, frighteningly calm for a woman whose 5-year marriage had just ended in front of a room full of people pretending not to stare. James Harrington adjusted his cufflinks near the fireplace without once looking at her, as if the divorce papers signed 40 minutes earlier had been nothing more than routine paperwork before dinner. Then Margaret Harrington stepped forward, pearls, cashmere, smile carrying no warmth. "You were never suited to this family," she said precisely. "At least now James can stop dragging you along like dead weight." The room went silent except for rain against the windows. Eleanor swallowed. Her throat burned, but she refused to break. Not here, not in front of these people. James finally spoke without lifting his eyes. "There is no need for this to become dramatic." Eleanor let out a quiet laugh that carried more pain than any tears could. "You invited 30 people to watch your wife leave her home. James, which part exactly was never supposed to be dramatic?" Margaret stepped between them like a wall. "You came into this family with nothing," she said coldly. "You leave exactly the same way." Eleanor looked around the estate one final time. The portraits, the antiques, the wedding photograph Margaret never wanted displayed downstairs. Every memory suddenly felt cold, like a beautiful room that had never truly belonged to her. She lifted her suitcase and walked toward the front doors without another word. As freezing rain hit her face, she heard someone behind her whisper that James would likely be engaged again before spring. She kept walking, head high, heart quietly breaking. Then her phone vibrated. "Miss Voss," said a calm voice. "Your grandfather's jet landed at Heathrow. He is requesting to see you tonight." Eleanor closed her eyes, and for the first time that evening, she smiled. By midnight, a town car stopped beneath the entrance of the Langham Hotel on Portland Place. The doorman stepped forward. Immediately, "Welcome back, Miss Voss," he said with quiet respect. She paused. It had been years since anyone in London spoke to her that way. Upstairs, standing near the window overlooking a rain-soaked London skyline, was Edward Voss. 80 years old, silver-haired, the kind of man whose presence made other powerful men suddenly remember their manners. He turned slowly. His expression hardened when he saw the suitcase. "They removed you," he said quietly. "Yes," Eleanor replied. Silence filled the room. The heavy silence of a man deciding exactly how much damage he was prepared to cause. Then Edward picked up his phone and spoke 4 quiet words. "Freeze all Harrington agreements." By 8 the following morning, Margaret sat at the breakfast table in cream, Silk discussing their charity. Gala as though the previous night had solved every problem in their world. James stared at cold, untouched coffee. He had not slept. His assistant appeared in the doorway, face pale. "Sir, Voss Capital has withdrawn from Monday's negotiations." "Withdrawn or postponed?" Margaret asked sharply. "Withdrawn, ma'am, indefinitely." The room fell silent. Voss Capital was not a small firm. They were one of the most quietly powerful private investment houses in Britain. Losing them publicly would send an immediate signal to every investor watching. By the time James reached his office, Harrington Holdings shares had already fallen 7%. Every call to Voss Capital went unanswered, every message ignored. His brother Thomas appeared holding a tablet with an expression James had never seen before. "You need to see this." The screen showed Eleanor stepping into a black Bentley outside. The Langham that morning, surrounded by private security, a silver family crest on the vehicle door. The headline beneath read, "Eleanor Voss Harrington confirmed as sole heir of Edward Voss, founder of Voss Capital, Margaret sat alone in the drawing room for the first time in years, without a single word prepared. She kept replaying what she had said in front of 30 witnesses. Dead weight. You came with nothing. You leave the same way. James found an old photograph that afternoon. A charity event in Edinburgh, 4 years earlier. He stood smiling with investors in the foreground. Eleanor stood slightly behind him in a black gown. And there, near the far wall beneath the chandeliers, stood Edward Voss. Eleanor had been looking directly across the room toward him the entire evening. Not surprised, not nervous, familiar. James leaned back slowly while 5 years of memories rearranged themselves into something unrecognizable. Her quiet confidence at dinners where others tried so hard to impress. The way she never appeared intimidated by wealth, because she had grown up surrounded by something so far beyond the Harrington world that their entire empire must have seemed almost ordinary to her. She had never needed them. She had chosen them, and they had thrown her into the rain. 3 weeks later, the financial papers ran a story that stopped conversations across London. Harrington Holdings had been quietly acquired by Voss Capital, the new owner assuming full control immediately. Her name was Eleanor Voss. On the morning the announcement published, James sat alone in the office he no longer owned. He stared at the acquisition document on his desk for a long time. On the signature line at the bottom, written in clean, unhurried script, was the name of the woman his family had thrown into the rain, the woman they called Dead Weight. Margaret never made a public statement, but staff quietly mentioned she removed the family portrait from the entrance hall the morning the news broke, the same spot where Eleanor once stood with a suitcase full of silence. Some people who underestimate you quietly hand you everything, you need to outlast them. Eleanor Voss walked out of Harrington Hall with a suitcase and a phone call.
She walked back in as the owner, and she never once raised her voice.